We are looking live at Ottawa right there, a very different look to the pictures that we were bringing you live last week. The House of Commons passed a motion to authorize the government's invocation of the Emergencies Act. That was last night. 185 MPs voting to support the act, 151 against. The NDP supported the Liberals. The Bloc and the Conservatives, they voted against the motion and the government.
I declare the motion carried. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
I rise to file with you, pursuant to Section 59 of the Emergencies Act, a motion to revoke the Prime Minister's emergency declaration that was proclaimed last week.
So, Interim Conservative leader Candice Bergen moving immediately after that to revoke the Emergencies Act, saying that its powers are sweeping and no longer needed with the blockade effectively over and border crossings reopened. The government maintains the state of emergency is not over yet, warning that protesters are regrouping and could stage more blockades. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau spoke ahead of Monday night's vote. He says there are no plans to keep the Act's enhanced powers in place longer than needed. The NDP will hold the government, it says, to that promise and could pull support at any moment. Janice McGregor is in Ottawa, and she's tracking the aftermath to all of this for us. So the motion now passed in the House, and then it moves on to the Senate. What's going to happen now, Janice?
That's right, Heather. 3 days of debate ahead of its vote in the upper chamber. Senators offered a briefing by 3 cabinet ministers last evening to help them get up to speed on this and understand it. Because so many of them are independents, it's a little difficult to predict what the result of the Senate vote might be. Of course, in the House, it did break down pretty evenly along predictable party lines. But when it does come time to vote in the Senate, it would be extraordinary indeed if that vote were to undo what has now been endorsed by the majority of the democratically elected members of Parliament. There will be, though, a special committee formed, which is supposed to include senators, to review all the different things that are done using these Emergency Act powers. It's one of Parliament's checks and balances against this. There's also today 2 meetings, 2 committees, the Public Safety Committee and the Finance Committee, the standing committees for the House of Commons that are going to be calling Minister Marco Mendicino, the Public Safety Minister, as well as a lot of top federal officials seeking to properly understand exactly how measures are being used, how these orders are working so far, what they're really being needed for, part of the government's case for keeping them in place, including an examination of the banking powers, which are getting quite a bit of attention here for a number of reasons, including fears amplified by Conservatives over the weekend that perhaps they were being abused, that the banking accounts of people who donated to the convoy were somehow improperly frozen. Now, that is something that the RCMP and the Finance Department stepped forward to fact check yesterday. But I do expect we are going to get a lot of questions, particularly at Finance Committee, about the financial measures and the freezing of accounts and what would happen when the powers were lifted. As you just showed in that clip, Heather, of course, Candice Bergen also last night immediately rising to propose a do-over of that vote to endorse the Emergency Act powers. That means that within 3 days of the House convening next week, it's not a break this week, next week, they will be holding a second vote to reconsider this. That perhaps a bit of a pressure tactic on people in the NDP or the government's backbench that maybe were a little reluctant to see these powers in place. But of course, the need for that vote assumes that the Liberal government itself won't have revoked the powers by then for its own reasons.
So, Janice, even as we follow the aftermath to the vote in Parliament, also watching a number of other developments as far as the protests go, the lingering protesters in surrounding areas, how is that factoring into things? And what's going on in the courts this morning that we know we're following there? Some bail hearings that are critical today. What are the developments on that front?
Yeah, I can tell you the judge has been giving her reasons just as we came to air here, Heather, in the case of Tamara Leach. It does not seem like she will be released. The judge feeling that the Crown made its case to keep her in detention for public safety reasons. She, of course, one of the key organizers, Pat King, another one not affiliated with her, but also quite instrumental in keeping these protests going. His hearing gets underway also at this hour. So we keep watching bail court, but we also, are keeping a watch on what could be 4 different locations where trucks are still kind of regrouping outside the city, perhaps mobilizing, organizing, figuring out what their next tactics are going to be. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and other ministers pointing to their continued presence as part of their case for keeping Emergency Act powers in place. They are having a profoundly destabilizing effect on not just the Prime Minister, who, as you say, has now been forced to defend his government use of these powers that he said never wanted to have, but, saying they had no other way to end the harm being done by these protests. But of course, other levels of government too, and even, the Conservative Party's leadership race, profoundly influenced by the kind of populist sentiments we're hearing. So I think, this is far from over, Heather.
Janice, thank you very much. Watching the developments out of Ottawa for us, our Janice McGregor.